My name is Cassidy Thompson, and I'm 24 years old. Standing alone in this empty parking lot outside my college graduation ceremony, rain soaking through my cap and gown, I should be celebrating the biggest achievement of my life. Instead, I'm staring at a text message from my parents asking to borrow $5,000 for emergency home repairs. The same parents who chose a Super Bowl party over watching me graduate summa cum laude just 3 hours ago. Now they want my money. Should I finally cut them off completely? Before I dive into this story that changed everything about my relationship with my family, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below and don't forget to hit that like button if you're ready to hear how I finally stood up to years of manipulation. Subscribe for more real-life stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about family loyalty. Trust me, what happens next will shock you as much as it shocked me. Let's get into this mess together. Growing up in the Thompson household meant learning early that my achievements would always come second to everyone else's priorities. My father, Dale Thompson, worked construction during the day and spent his evenings glued to sports channels, placing bets on games with money we couldn't afford to lose. Mom, Janet Thompson, owned a small hair salon downtown and cared more about maintaining her social image than acknowledging anything meaningful I accomplished. Then there was my older brother Trevor, the golden child who could do no wrong despite doing absolutely nothing right. The pattern started when I was 7 years old and made honor roll for the first time. I remember running home with my report card, bursting through the front door with excitement, only to find my parents celebrating Trevor's C+ in math like he'd just won a Nobel Prize. When I showed them my straight A's, Dad barely glanced up from his newspaper and Mom said something about not getting a big head over grades. That moment taught me that excellence wasn't valued in our house unless it came from Trevor. Throughout elementary and middle school, I learned to excel in silence. I joined the debate team and won regional competitions, but my parents always had somewhere more important to be. Dad would promise to attend my debates, then remember he had tickets to a baseball game. Mom would agree to help me practice, then get distracted by salon gossip phone calls that lasted hours. Meanwhile, Trevor's mediocre soccer games received full family attendance, complete with professionally made banners and team snacks that cost more than my entire school supply budget. High school brought more of the same disappointment, but I'd grown numb to it by then. When I earned a full academic scholarship to State University, my parents' response was to worry about how they'd pay for Trevor's community college classes since he barely graduated with a 2.1 GPA. They co-signed loans for his education while expecting me to handle everything myself, claiming that since I was so smart, I didn't need their help anyway. The financial favoritism became impossible to ignore during my sophomore year of college. Trevor showed up at family dinner driving a brand new pickup truck, a graduation gift that cost more than my 4 years of tuition combined. When I asked how they could afford such an expensive present, Dad explained that Trevor needed reliable transportation for his construction job, conveniently ignoring the fact that I was working 3 part-time jobs just to afford textbooks and groceries. Every semester, I'd watch my classmates get care packages, surprise visits, and emotional support from their families while I received birthday cards 3 weeks late and Christmas presents clearly bought from the clearance rack at the last minute. My parents knew my class schedule, my work schedule, and my exam dates, but somehow never managed to coordinate their lives around anything important to me. The emotional neglect was disguised as character building. When I complained about feeling unsupported, Mom would lecture me about the importance of independence and self-reliance. Dad would remind me that life wasn't fair and I needed to toughen up if I wanted to succeed. They painted my need for family support as weakness while simultaneously enabling Trevor's complete dependence on their financial and emotional rescue operations. The morning of my graduation ceremony, I woke up early and made my parents their favorite breakfast, hoping this special day might be different. I'd sent them the ceremony details weeks in advance, bought them reserved seating tickets, and even offered to pay for their hotel room if they wanted to stay overnight and celebrate together. Instead, I found them in the living room planning their Super Bowl party menu and arguing over whether to buy expensive steaks or cheaper chicken wings for their guests. When I reminded them about the graduation ceremony, Dad looked at me like I was being unreasonable. "It's just a ceremony, Cassidy," he said, not even looking up from his party planning notebook. "We've seen plenty of graduations. This Super Bowl only happens once a year." Mom nodded in agreement, adding that they'd already promised their friends they'd host the party and couldn't disappoint people who were counting on them. The irony wasn't lost on me that disappointing me never seemed to factor into their decision-making process. I stood in that living room, wearing my cap and gown, holding my diploma preview, and begged them to reconsider. I explained how important this day was to me, how I'd worked 4 years to reach this moment, how I wanted to share it with my family. Trevor chose that moment to walk in and immediately sided with our parents, calling me dramatic for expecting them to miss the biggest game of the year for something as boring as a college graduation. He reminded me that I'd already gotten my degree and the ceremony was just pomp and circumstance that didn't matter in the real world. That's when I realized that no amount of achievement would ever be enough to earn their attention or respect. I could cure cancer, win a Pulitzer Prize, or become President of the United States, and they'd still find something more important to do than acknowledge my success. The foundation of neglect they'd built over 17 years was solid and unshakable, designed to keep me in my place as the family member whose accomplishments didn't matter enough to celebrate. Walking into that graduation ceremony alone felt like a public declaration of my family's priorities. The auditorium buzzed with excited chatter as families claimed their seats, snapping photos and adjusting their positions for the best view of their graduates. I scanned the reserved section where my parents' tickets remained unused, 3 empty chairs that might as well have been spotlights highlighting my abandonment. Around me, proud families waved banners with their graduates' names, wearing matching t-shirts and clutching flowers they'd brought to celebrate this milestone moment. The ceremony began with the traditional processional, and I watched other students light up as they spotted their loved ones in the crowd. Camera flashes went off constantly as families documented every second of their children's big moment. When my row was called to stand, I looked once more toward those empty seats, holding on to some ridiculous hope that my parents might have changed their minds and rushed over from their party. Instead, I saw strangers who smiled politely and a few other families' relatives who nodded encouragingly at all the graduates, not just their own. Dean Patricia Williams took the podium and began announcing the summa cum laude graduates, the students who had maintained the highest academic standards throughout their college careers. When she called my name, I walked across that stage to scattered applause from people who didn't know me but understood the significance of academic achievement. The handful of classmates I knew well cheered loudly from the graduate section, but their voices couldn't fill the silence left by my family's absence. I accepted my diploma, shook hands with the dean, and smiled for the official photographer, knowing that no one who mattered to me would ever see those pictures. While the ceremony continued, I couldn't resist checking my phone. My social media feeds were filled with graduation photos from classmates posing with their families, but when I scrolled to my parents' accounts, I found something that made my stomach drop. They had posted multiple photos from their Super Bowl party, showing off their elaborate spread of food and decorations. Dad had tagged 6 different friends in posts about the best party of the year, and Mom had shared videos of their guests cheering during the game. They had found time to document every detail of their party while completely ignoring the fact that their daughter was achieving something they'd never accomplished themselves. The most painful part was seeing their friends' comments praising them for throwing such an amazing party. These were people who had watched me grow up, who knew I was graduating from college that day, and not one of them questioned why Dale and Janet weren't at the ceremony supporting their daughter. My parents had trained everyone in their social circle to accept their priorities as normal, creating an environment where choosing a football game over their child's graduation was just another day in the Thompson family. After the ceremony ended, I stood in the lobby watching tearful reunions between graduates and their families. My classmate Ashley Chen found me standing alone and immediately pulled me into her family's celebration circle. Her parents, who had driven 8 hours to attend, insisted on taking pictures with me and treating me to the expensive restaurant dinner they'd planned for Ashley. Sitting at that table, surrounded by people who barely knew me but were genuinely excited about my achievement, I experienced what real family support felt like for the first time in my life. Mr. and Mrs. Chen asked detailed questions about my studies, my plans for the future, and my job prospects with genuine interest and pride. They toasted my success alongside Ashley's and insisted on paying for my meal despite my protests. When Mrs. Chen learned that my parents hadn't attended, she didn't try to make excuses for them or suggest there must have been a good reason. Instead, she simply said that their loss was our gain because we got to celebrate together, and sometimes chosen family matters more than biological family. The drive home gave me 2 hours to practice the confrontation I'd been avoiding for years. I rehearsed different versions of the speech I wanted to give my parents, trying to find words that would make them understand how deeply they'd hurt me without giving them ammunition to dismiss my feelings as overdramatic. I wanted to be calm, rational, and clear about how their choices had affected me throughout my life. I planned to set boundaries and demand the respect I deserved as their daughter and as an adult who had just achieved something significant. But when I pulled into our driveway, the house was dark and empty. The remnants of their Super Bowl party were scattered across the front yard, empty beer bottles, forgotten napkins, and a banner that read Thompson Super Bowl Bash in letters bigger than any sign they'd ever made for my achievements. I used my key to enter the house and found the kitchen and living room in complete disarray. Dirty dishes covered every surface, empty food containers overflowed from the trash, and the smell of stale beer and leftover pizza permeated the air. On the kitchen table, I found a hastily scribbled note in Mom's handwriting: "Went to casino with winnings, back tomorrow." Dad had apparently won big on some Super Bowl bet and they'd decided to extend their celebration with a gambling trip, leaving me to come home to their mess after my graduation. The symbolism wasn't lost on me that they were literally gambling away their winnings while I was starting my adult life with student loans and the determination to build something better than what they'd shown me. 20 minutes later, my phone rang with Trevor's number on the display. I answered hoping he might offer some support or acknowledge the significance of the day, but instead he launched into a lecture about my ungrateful attitude toward our parents. He'd heard from Mom that I was upset about them missing my graduation, and he wanted to make sure I understood how selfish I was being. According to Trevor, I was being dramatic about a stupid ceremony and needed to appreciate everything our parents had sacrificed for me over the years. The conversation revealed that my parents had been complaining to Trevor about my expectations for weeks leading up to graduation. They'd painted me as demanding and ungrateful for wanting them to attend, suggesting that I thought I was better than the rest of the family because of my education. Trevor bought into their narrative completely, reminding me that Mom and Dad had more important things to do than sit through boring speeches just to watch me walk across a stage for 30 seconds. That night, lying in my childhood bed surrounded by academic awards and scholarship certificates that no one in my family had ever bothered to read, I finally understood that I'd been fighting a losing battle my entire life. No amount of achievement would ever be enough to earn their pride or attention because they'd decided long ago that I didn't deserve it. The betrayal wasn't just about missing my graduation. It was about 24 years of systematic emotional neglect disguised as parenting. My parents returned the next evening with Oscar-worthy performances of concern and desperation. Dad burst through the front door carrying a manila folder full of official-looking documents while Mom followed behind with red-rimmed eyes and tissues clutched in her hand. They'd apparently spent their drive home from the casino crafting an elaborate story about a foundation crisis that threatened to destroy our family home. According to their dramatic presentation, a routine inspection had revealed catastrophic structural damage that required immediate attention before the house became uninhabitable. Dale spread the documents across the kitchen table like evidence in a court case, pointing to what appeared to be professional contractor estimates totaling exactly $5,000. He explained in urgent tones that the foundation was cracking along the eastern wall, creating a dangerous situation that could lead to partial collapse if not addressed within the week. Mom sobbed quietly in the background, occasionally interjecting comments about losing the house where she'd raised her children and built her life. They painted a picture of financial devastation that would leave them homeless unless I could provide emergency funding to save the family property. The timing felt suspiciously convenient, considering they'd just asked for money via text message during my graduation ceremony, but I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they were finally reaching out because they recognized my success and trusted my judgment. Maybe this crisis would bring us together as a family facing adversity. I examined their paperwork carefully, noting the professional letterhead and detailed cost breakdowns that looked legitimate at first glance. Janet explained through tears that they'd already contacted every family member and friend for help, but no one else had the financial stability to assist with such a large amount on short notice. Trevor was struggling with his own bills, and their friends were dealing with their own financial challenges. I was their last hope, the responsible daughter who had always been good with money and planning. They needed me to step up for the family in this critical moment, proving that all their support over the years hadn't been wasted on someone who would abandon them when they needed help most. Something about their presentation didn't feel right, but I couldn't immediately identify what was bothering me. Dad was using technical terms about foundations and structural integrity that seemed inconsistent with his construction background, and Mom's emotional display felt rehearsed rather than genuine. I asked to see additional documentation like the original inspection report or permits for the proposed work, but they claimed everything was included in the folder they'd already shown me. When I requested time to review everything carefully before making such a significant financial decision, they became increasingly agitated about the urgency of the situation. The next morning, while my parents were at work, I decided to verify their story independently. I called the contractor listed on the estimate using the phone number printed on their professional letterhead. After several rings, a recorded message informed me that the number had been disconnected with no forwarding information available. I tried searching for the company name online and found no website, no business listings, and no reviews from previous customers. For a contractor supposedly established enough to handle major foundation repairs, they had virtually no digital presence. My suspicion growing stronger, I drove to the county office to research property records and permits for our family home. The clerk helped me access public records dating back 5 years, and I discovered that no permits had been filed for foundation work, no inspections had been scheduled, and no safety violations had been reported for our property. According to official county records, our house was in good standing with all required inspections current and no outstanding issues noted in any recent assessments. Further investigation revealed the true scope of my parents' financial situation, and it was worse than I'd imagined. They had maxed out multiple credit cards, taken a second mortgage on the house without mentioning it to anyone, and had been making only minimum payments on various debts for over a year. Dad's gambling problem had progressed from occasional sports betting to regular casino visits that were draining their accounts faster than they could replenish them. Mom's salon was struggling to stay profitable due to her poor management and tendency to spend business income on personal expenses. The most shocking discovery came when I accessed public records of recent financial transactions involving my family members. Trevor had borrowed $15,000 from our parents 6 months earlier, supposedly for a business investment that would help him become financially independent. However, bank records showed that the money had been transferred directly to a debt consolidation company, suggesting that Trevor's investment opportunity was actually a gambling debt he couldn't repay. Our parents had enabled his addiction while hiding their own financial crisis. I realized that their request for $5,000 wasn't an isolated emergency but part of a systematic pattern of targeting family members for money. They'd been monitoring my job prospects and income level for months, waiting for the right moment to approach me for a significant loan. Their choice to ask for money immediately after my graduation wasn't coincidental. They'd planned to leverage my emotional vulnerability and sense of family obligation to manipulate me into funding their irresponsible lifestyle. The fake contractor estimates were professionally created, suggesting they'd put considerable effort into crafting their deception. I found drafts of similar documents on Dad's computer, indicating they'd practiced this approach multiple times and had backup stories ready if their foundation crisis didn't work. They'd researched enough about home repairs to sound knowledgeable while keeping their fabricated costs just high enough to solve their immediate financial problems without seeming impossibly expensive. When I checked my bank account online that evening, I discovered several failed login attempts from an IP address that traced back to our family computer. Someone had been trying to access my financial information for weeks, presumably to verify my account balance before approaching me for money. They knew exactly how much I could afford to lend them, and their $5,000 request represented nearly half of my carefully saved emergency fund. The depth of their planning and deception was staggering. This wasn't a desperate family reaching out for help during a genuine crisis. This was a calculated manipulation designed to exploit my love and sense of duty. They'd weaponized my success against me, treating my graduation as an opportunity to access my money rather than a moment to celebrate my achievement. Everything about their approach had been designed to make me feel guilty for hesitating while pressuring me to make a quick decision before I had time to think critically about their claims. That night, I sat in my childhood bedroom surrounded by evidence of their lies, finally understanding that my parents viewed me as a financial resource rather than their daughter. They'd invested years in maintaining my sense of family obligation specifically so they could cash in when they needed money. My academic success, my responsible financial habits, and my steady income weren't sources of pride for them. They were assets they planned to exploit when their own poor decisions caught up with them. Armed with evidence of their deception, I waited until the next evening to confront my parents when they returned from work expecting my answer about their loan request. I had copies of all the public records, screenshots of the disconnected phone numbers, and documentation proving their foundation crisis was completely fabricated. My plan was to present the evidence calmly and give them an opportunity to explain themselves before making any decisions about our relationship moving forward. I hoped that confronting them with proof of their lies might lead to honest conversation about their real financial problems and their reasons for deceiving me. Instead, Dad exploded into a rage that shook the entire house. When I showed him the county records proving no foundation work was needed, he accused me of destroying the family with my suspicious nature and lack of trust. He claimed I was so selfish and paranoid that I'd rather see them lose their home than help during a genuine emergency. According to his twisted logic, my investigation into their claims was evidence of my poor character rather than proof of their dishonesty. He shouted that I'd always thought I was better than everyone else because of my education and now I was using my college smarts to humiliate my own parents. Mom immediately switched tactics from desperate victim to wounded martyr, sobbing dramatically about how ungrateful and heartless her own daughter had become. She claimed they'd sacrificed everything to raise me and this was how I repaid their years of love and support. When I pointed out specific instances of their neglect throughout my childhood, she dismissed my memories as exaggerated complaints from someone who couldn't appreciate everything they'd done behind the scenes. She painted herself as the long-suffering mother of an ungrateful child who had turned against her own family the moment she achieved any success. Trevor arrived 30 minutes into our confrontation, clearly summoned by frantic phone calls from our parents who needed backup for their emotional manipulation campaign. He immediately launched into a verbal attack on my selfishness, claiming I was destroying family unity with my refusal to help during their time of need. Without even asking about the evidence I'd gathered, he sided completely with our parents and accused me of being brainwashed by my college education into thinking I was superior to my working-class family. He reminded me that family loyalty mattered more than facts and I was betraying everything we'd been taught about sticking together. The three of them ganged up on me with a coordinated assault designed to break down my resistance through guilt, shame, and emotional exhaustion. They listed every expense they'd ever incurred raising me, from hospital bills when I was born to groceries they'd bought during my high school years, presenting these normal parental responsibilities as debts I owed them. According to their calculations, I was financially obligated to repay them for 18 years of basic care, and my refusal to provide $5,000 was theft of money that rightfully belonged to them. When emotional manipulation failed to work, they escalated to threats and ultimatums. Dad announced that if I didn't provide the money within 24 hours, they would cut off all contact with me permanently and tell the entire extended family that I had abandoned them during their darkest hour. Mom threatened to call my employer and tell them I was mentally unstable and couldn't be trusted with important responsibilities. Trevor promised to make sure all our mutual friends knew I was the type of person who would watch her own parents become homeless rather than help them financially. Their most manipulative move involved our grandmother, Mildred Thompson, who lived in an assisted living facility across town. They'd already contacted her and told her I was refusing to help with crucial medical bills that would determine whether she could continue receiving necessary treatment. When grandmother Mildred called me in tears, begging me to reconsider my decision to abandon the family, I realized my parents had fabricated an entire medical crisis to turn her against me. They'd convinced her that my selfishness was threatening her health and safety, using her genuine confusion and fear to add pressure to their manipulation campaign. The cruelty of involving our elderly grandmother in their deception crossed a line I hadn't known existed. Mildred was suffering from early-stage dementia and couldn't distinguish between their lies and reality, making her the perfect unwitting accomplice in their emotional terrorism. They'd weaponized her love for me and her natural concern for family welfare, knowing that disappointing her would cause me more pain than any direct threat they could make. Her tearful phone calls became daily occurrences, each one adding another layer of guilt and confusion to an already impossible situation. My parents demanded that I call every relative who had contacted me about their fabricated crisis and personally apologize for my selfish attitude toward family responsibilities. They wanted me to admit publicly that I was wrong to question their story and commit to providing whatever financial support they requested in the future. This public humiliation was designed to establish their authority over my finances and ensure that future manipulation attempts would be easier since I'd already confessed to being an ungrateful daughter who needed family guidance to make proper decisions. The final ultimatum came with a time limit and severe consequences for noncompliance. I had exactly 24 hours to transfer $5,000 to their account, call every relative to apologize for my behavior, and promise never to investigate or question their financial requests again. If I failed to meet any of these demands, they would permanently destroy my relationships with extended family, contact my employer with accusations of mental instability, and ensure that I became a social pariah who had chosen money over family loyalty. The psychological pressure was enormous, but what bothered me most was their complete lack of remorse about the lies they'd told or the pain they'd caused. Even when confronted with undeniable proof of their deception, they showed no shame or willingness to apologize. Instead, they doubled down on their manipulation and increased the stakes, proving that this wasn't a desperate mistake but a calculated attack on my financial independence and emotional well-being. That night, lying awake in my childhood bed while my parents made loud phone calls to relatives, spinning their version of events and portraying me as the villain, I finally understood that I wasn't dealing with family members who loved me imperfectly. I was dealing with people who viewed me as a resource to be exploited and would use any means necessary to maintain control over me. Their threats weren't empty posturing. They were serious about destroying my life if I didn't comply with their demands. Unable to sleep after my parents' ultimatum, I decided to contact grandmother Mildred directly and find out exactly what my parents had told her about our family crisis. I drove to Sunset Manor early the next morning, hoping to catch her during her lucid hours when her dementia symptoms were typically less severe. What I discovered during that visit changed everything about my understanding of my family's dynamics and gave me the first glimpse of hope that I wasn't fighting this battle alone. Mildred was confused and frightened, exactly as my parents had intended, but she was also angry about being lied to repeatedly. When I gently questioned her about the medical bills she mentioned, she had no knowledge of any outstanding balances or treatment concerns. Her Medicare and supplemental insurance covered all her care, and the facility had never contacted her about any financial problems. She'd been receiving daily phone calls from Janet and Dale claiming that I was refusing to help with emergency medical expenses that threatened her ability to stay at Sunset Manor. More disturbing was Mildred's revelation that money had been disappearing from her checking account for months. She'd noticed smaller amounts at first, $20 or $30 that she assumed were automatic charges she'd forgotten about, but recently larger sums had been withdrawn without her knowledge or permission. When she'd asked the bank about the transactions, they'd shown her signed withdrawal slips that looked like her handwriting but that she didn't remember creating. Someone with access to her account information and signature samples had been systematically stealing from her Social Security income. The theft pattern became clear when Mildred showed me her bank statements from the past 6 months. Regular withdrawals occurred every few weeks, always in amounts small enough to avoid triggering automatic fraud alerts but large enough to impact her monthly budget. The timing corresponded with my parents' casino trips and Trevor's emergency expenses, suggesting they'd been supplementing their gambling funds with grandmother's fixed income. They'd been stealing from an elderly woman with dementia while convincing her that her granddaughter was the one refusing to help the family financially. As I was leaving Sunset Manor, my phone rang with a call from Uncle Raymond Thompson, Dad's younger brother who lived 2 states away and rarely involved himself in family drama. His voice was tense as he explained that he'd been receiving strange phone calls from Dale and Janet asking detailed questions about my job, my income, and my relationship status. They'd claimed to be planning a surprise celebration for my graduation, but their questions focused more on my financial situation than any party planning. Raymond was calling to warn me that something didn't feel right about their interest in my personal life. Raymond's suspicions had been growing for several months as he'd received similar calls about other family members' financial situations. Dale had contacted him asking about our cousin Jennifer's divorce settlement, Trevor had called asking about our Aunt Dorothy's inheritance from her late husband, and Janet had made casual inquiries about which relatives might be willing to help with various family emergencies. It seemed like they were conducting financial surveillance on the entire extended family, cataloging everyone's resources for future manipulation campaigns. Our phone conversation revealed that Raymond had been quietly investigating unusual family financial transactions for months. As the only family member with a background in accounting, he'd noticed patterns in various relatives' stories about lending money to Dale, Janet, and Trevor. Several cousins had been approached for loans to help with different emergencies, and none of the borrowed money had ever been repaid despite promises of quick reimbursement once their temporary crisis was resolved. 3 hours later, Raymond called back with information that made my stomach drop. He'd contacted our cousin Jennifer Williams, who lived in the neighboring state, and discovered that she'd been the victim of the same foundation repair scam 6 months earlier. Dale and Janet had presented her with identical paperwork claiming their house was in danger of collapse, and she'd loaned them $3,000 that was never repaid. When she'd asked about repayment, they'd claimed the foundation work had revealed additional problems requiring more extensive repairs, making them unable to pay her back until the entire project was completed. Jennifer agreed to drive over that evening to compare notes about our parents' behavior and help me understand the full scope of their manipulation network. When she arrived, she brought a folder full of documents that told a horrifying story of systematic family fraud spanning several years. She'd been tracking their lies and keeping records of their various scams after realizing that her foundation repair loan was never legitimate. Her investigation had uncovered at least 8 different family members who'd been targeted for money using similar emotional manipulation tactics. The pattern was sophisticated and carefully planned. Dale and Janet would identify a family member going through a significant life transition, like graduation, marriage, divorce, or job change, when emotions were heightened and decision-making might be compromised. They'd approach with a crisis story designed specifically for that person's situation and financial capacity. College graduates received requests for exact amounts matching their likely savings, divorced relatives were asked for sums corresponding to their settlement amounts, and newly employed family members were targeted based on their salary information. Jennifer's documentation showed that Trevor was actively involved in gathering intelligence for these operations. He would attend family gatherings, weddings, and reunions specifically to collect information about relatives' financial situations, relationship problems, and life changes that might make them vulnerable to manipulation. He'd befriend cousins on social media to monitor their posts for information about job promotions, home purchases, or other indicators of financial stability that his parents could exploit. Uncle Raymond revealed that he'd contacted an attorney friend who specialized in elder abuse and family financial crimes. The systematic theft from grandmother Mildred, combined with the documented fraud pattern targeting multiple family members, constituted organized criminal activity that could result in serious legal consequences. We weren't dealing with desperate family members making poor decisions, we were dealing with an organized fraud ring that happened to share our DNA. Our alliance formed naturally around the shared goal of protecting other family members from future victimization while seeking justice for the crimes that had already been committed. Jennifer had been feeling isolated and ashamed about being deceived by her own family, and Raymond had been frustrated by his inability to prove what he suspected was happening. Together, we represented 3 generations of the Thompson family who had recognized the manipulation and were willing to take action to stop it. That night, we developed a plan to gather additional evidence and expose my parents' fraud network before they could target more victims. Jennifer would coordinate with other relatives who had been scammed, Raymond would handle the financial documentation and legal aspects, and I would focus on protecting grandmother Mildred while building a case against all 3 perpetrators. For the first time since my graduation, I felt like I had real family support from people who valued honesty and justice over blind loyalty to manipulative relatives. My parents realized their carefully constructed lies were unraveling when I failed to meet their 24-hour ultimatum for the money transfer. Instead of accepting that their manipulation had failed, they escalated to a full-scale character assassination campaign designed to destroy my reputation and credibility before I could expose their crimes. What followed was 3 weeks of systematic attacks on every aspect of my life, proving that their threats about ruining me weren't empty posturing but a detailed revenge strategy they'd been prepared to execute from the beginning. The social media assault began immediately. Dale and Janet created detailed posts on their personal accounts claiming I was suffering from a mental breakdown triggered by graduation stress and college debt. They painted a picture of an unstable young woman who was lashing out at her loving family due to psychological problems that required professional intervention. According to their fabricated narrative, I'd become paranoid and delusional, accusing my own parents of lying about a genuine home emergency because I couldn't handle the responsibility of helping during a family crisis. Their posts were carefully crafted to generate maximum sympathy while making me appear dangerous and unreliable. They claimed I'd been experimenting with drugs throughout college, using my academic success to hide a serious addiction problem that was now affecting my judgment and behavior. They shared old photos of me looking tired during finals week, describing them as evidence of drug use and mental deterioration. Family friends who barely knew me began commenting with concern and offers to help my struggling parents deal with their troubled daughter. The campaign expanded beyond social media when they contacted my university directly, demanding that administrators review my degree for academic fraud. They claimed I'd cheated my way through college using drugs to enhance my performance and had threatened them with violence when they tried to intervene in my self-destructive behavior. Dale spoke with the dean of students, presenting himself as a concerned father trying to get help for his mentally ill daughter who was too proud to accept the treatment she desperately needed. My former professors began receiving calls from Janet, who identified herself as my worried mother and expressed concern about my psychological state during my final semester. She suggested that my graduation project might have involved plagiarism or academic dishonesty, claiming that my recent behavior indicated a pattern of deception and rule-breaking that probably extended to my schoolwork. Several faculty members contacted me directly to ask if I needed counseling services or academic support, creating professional embarrassment that could have lasting consequences for my reputation. The most damaging attack came when they filed a false police report claiming I had threatened them with physical violence during our confrontation about the loan. Dale told Officer Marcus Rodriguez that I'd become enraged when they refused to enable my drug habit with money, and I'd threatened to burn down their house if they didn't pay for my addiction treatment. They presented our heated argument as evidence of my dangerous mental state and requested a restraining order to protect themselves from their unstable daughter. Officer Rodriguez was experienced enough to recognize the inconsistencies in their story immediately. Their claims about my drug use didn't match my appearance or behavior during his investigation, and their timeline of events kept changing as he asked follow-up questions. When he interviewed me separately, my calm demeanor and detailed documentation of their financial fraud attempts convinced him that I was the victim rather than the perpetrator. However, the false report remained on record and could be used against me if they escalated their attacks further. Their legal strategy involved hiring attorney Benjamin Clark, a family law specialist who advertised his services for parents dealing with difficult adult children. They wanted to pursue a civil harassment case that would require me to pay for psychological evaluation and drug testing while restricting my ability to contact them or other family members. The goal was to use the legal system to legitimize their claims about my mental instability while forcing me to spend money on defense attorneys instead of exposing their crimes. The physical harassment began when someone vandalized my apartment complex parking lot, pouring sugar into my car's gas tank and breaking 2 windows with rocks. Threatening notes appeared in my mailbox every few days, written in disguised handwriting and signed "From your disappointed family." The messages escalated from general threats about consequences for my behavior to specific details about my daily routine that proved someone was watching my apartment and tracking my movements. My professional life became another target when my coworkers at the financial services firm where I'd recently started my career began receiving anonymous phone calls about my criminal behavior and drug problem. The caller, who identified herself as a concerned family member, warned that I might steal money or behave unpredictably due to my addiction issues. She suggested that the company should conduct drug testing and background checks to protect themselves from potential liability if I caused problems in the workplace. The workplace harassment escalated dramatically when Dale appeared at my office building during lunch hour, screaming about stolen money in the lobby where clients and colleagues could witness his performance. He demanded that security personnel force me to return thousands of dollars I'd allegedly taken from my family, claiming that my employer needed to know they'd hired a thief who was using her job to hide money stolen from her own parents. The scene was humiliating and professionally damaging, requiring intervention from building security and explanations to my supervisor about my family's situation. Security cameras captured Trevor breaking into my apartment while I was at work, though he was careful not to steal anything that would constitute obvious burglary. Instead, he went through my personal documents, photographed my bank statements and employment records, and left evidence that someone had been searching through my belongings. The psychological impact of knowing my own brother had violated my privacy and safety was devastating, but the legal impact was minimal since nothing was actually stolen. The medical emergency fabrication reached new levels of cruelty when Janet called me from what she claimed was a hospital emergency room, sobbing that she'd suffered a heart attack brought on by stress over my behavior. She begged me to come immediately and make peace with the family before it was too late, using my fear of losing her permanently to manipulate my emotions. When I called the hospital directly to verify her condition, they had no record of any patient by her name being admitted or treated in their emergency department. My credit report began showing suspicious activity as someone attempted to open new accounts using my personal information. The applications were unsuccessful because I had security freezes in place, but the attempted identity theft indicated that my parents had access to my social security number and other sensitive information they were willing to use against me. They were prepared to destroy my financial future if I continued challenging their authority and exposing their crimes to other family members. The coordinated nature of their attacks proved that this wasn't emotional retaliation but a strategic campaign they'd planned in advance. They had backup plans for every aspect of their manipulation, from legal harassment to professional sabotage to physical intimidation. Their willingness to involve law enforcement, attorneys, and medical facilities in their deception showed that they viewed me as an enemy who needed to be neutralized rather than a family member who deserved honesty and respect. With Uncle Raymond and Cousin Jennifer's support, I realized that defending myself against my parents' attacks wasn't enough. I needed to take offensive action to protect other potential victims and seek justice for the crimes they'd already committed. Our alliance had grown stronger as we'd gathered evidence and compared our experiences, giving me the confidence to fight back with legal and public exposure strategies that would hold them accountable for their systematic fraud and harassment. The first step was hiring private investigator Diana Foster, a former police detective who specialized in financial crimes and family fraud cases. Raymond connected me with Diana through his attorney friend, and she agreed to take the case after reviewing the evidence we'd already gathered. Her professional investigation would provide the credibility and legal documentation needed to prove our claims in court while protecting us from accusations of bias or family vendetta. Diana's preliminary investigation confirmed our suspicions within a week. Using her law enforcement contacts and database access, she traced financial transactions showing systematic theft from at least 12 different family members over a 5-year period. The total amount stolen exceeded $60,000, with victims including disabled cousin Robert, elderly Aunt Dorothy, and recently divorced sister-in-law Michelle. Each victim had been targeted during vulnerable life transitions and manipulated with customized sob stories designed to exploit their specific emotional and financial situations. The documentation showed clear patterns of coordination between Dale, Janet, and Trevor in their fraud operations. Trevor would gather intelligence about potential targets' financial situations, Dale would create the false documentation and backstories for their emergencies, and Janet would provide the emotional manipulation and follow-up pressure to ensure compliance. They developed a sophisticated system for laundering stolen money through multiple accounts and false business entities to avoid detection by individual victims. Armed with Diana's professional findings, I contacted attorney Stephanie Marshall, who specialized in elder abuse and family financial crimes. Stephanie agreed to take the case pro bono after learning about the systematic abuse of grandmother Mildred and the extensive pattern of family fraud. Her involvement legitimized our claims and provided legal protection against my parents' harassment while building a criminal case that could result in serious consequences for all 3 perpetrators. The first legal victory came when Stephanie successfully obtained a restraining order against my parents and Trevor, using Diana's evidence to prove their harassment and threats were escalating dangerously. Judge Patricia Collins reviewed the documentation of their character assassination campaign, workplace harassment, and physical intimidation before granting broad protection that prohibited any contact with me directly or through third parties. The restraining order also included provisions protecting my professional reputation and requiring them to cease their false claims about my mental health and drug use. Grandmother Mildred's situation required immediate intervention to prevent further financial abuse and protect her from their emotional manipulation. With her consent and Raymond's support as her power of attorney, we transferred her accounts to a new bank and implemented safeguards preventing unauthorized access to her funds. The documentation of their theft from her Social Security income became a crucial part of the elder abuse case that would carry the most serious criminal penalties. Our strategy shifted to public exposure when we contacted local news reporter Kevin Murphy, who specialized in investigative stories about financial fraud and elder abuse. Kevin was immediately interested in the story because it involved multiple victims, systematic criminal activity, and the unusual element of family members targeting their own relatives for theft. His investigation would provide public accountability while warning other potential victims about their methods and fake documentation. The criminal case gained momentum when Detective Robert Hayes agreed to investigate the evidence we'd gathered and pursue charges against all 3 perpetrators. Detective Hayes had experience with family fraud rings and recognized the sophisticated nature of their operation, which went far beyond simple theft or misunderstandings about money. The involvement of elder abuse, identity theft attempts, and organized fraud across state lines made this a serious criminal matter rather than a family dispute. Benjamin Clark, the attorney my parents had hired to pursue harassment charges against me, withdrew from their case after reviewing Diana's investigation and Stephanie's documentation of their criminal activity. Professional ethics prevented him from representing clients who were using his services to further ongoing criminal enterprises, and he advised them to seek criminal defense representation instead. His withdrawal left them without legal protection just as our criminal and civil cases were gaining strength. The evidence collection process revealed additional victims who had been afraid to speak up about their experiences with Dale, Janet, and Trevor. Several elderly relatives admitted they'd been targeted for money but had remained silent due to shame about being deceived by family members. Younger relatives shared stories about employment information being gathered for unknown purposes and suspicious questions about their financial situations during family gatherings. Jennifer's role expanded to coordinating victim support and assistance as more family members came forward with evidence of theft and manipulation. She'd been maintaining detailed records since her own victimization and was able to provide templates and guidance for other relatives who wanted to file police reports or pursue civil recovery. Her experience with the legal process and emotional recovery made her an invaluable resource for the growing group of victims seeking justice. The pattern of their crimes showed clear escalation over time, beginning with small thefts from elderly relatives and progressing to elaborate fraud schemes targeting younger family members with significant financial resources. Their willingness to involve law enforcement, medical facilities, and legal systems in their deception indicated they were prepared to commit additional felonies to maintain their income stream from family theft. Public record searches revealed that Dale and Janet had been planning to declare bankruptcy while hiding assets through fraudulent transfers to fictitious business entities. Their house was secretly listed for sale through a private real estate agent, and they'd been attempting to liquidate grandmother Mildred's possessions without her knowledge or consent. The discovery of these additional crimes strengthened our case and demonstrated the urgency of stopping their activity before they could flee with stolen money. The momentum of our counterattack was building rapidly, with legal, criminal, and public accountability measures all proceeding simultaneously. For the first time since my graduation, I felt like justice was possible and that their years of manipulation and theft would finally have consequences. The alliance we'd built provided emotional support and practical assistance that proved family could be chosen rather than inherited, and sometimes the people who truly care about you aren't the ones who share your DNA. The family reunion that had been planned months earlier became the perfect setting for the public confrontation that would expose my parents' crimes to the entire extended family. What was supposed to be a casual gathering at Uncle Raymond's house transformed into a dramatic reckoning when we presented 5 years of documented evidence to 30 relatives who had no idea they were related to organized criminals. The presence of Detective Hayes and reporter Kevin Murphy added gravity to the situation and ensured that justice would be served regardless of family politics or misplaced loyalty. I stood in Raymond's living room surrounded by aunts, uncles, and cousins who had gathered for what they thought would be a pleasant afternoon of catching up and sharing family news. Instead, I methodically presented documentation showing how Dale, Janet, and Trevor had systematically targeted 12 different family members for theft totaling over $60,000. The evidence included bank records, false documents they'd created, recorded phone conversations, and testimonies from victims who had been afraid to speak up until they realized they weren't alone. The room fell silent as I explained how they'd used family gatherings like this one to gather intelligence about everyone's financial situations, relationship problems, and life changes that might make them vulnerable to manipulation. Trevor's friendly conversations about jobs and relationships weren't casual interest in family members' lives. They were reconnaissance missions designed to identify targets and develop customized fraud strategies. Every wedding, graduation, and holiday celebration had been an opportunity for them to plan their next theft. Cousin Dorothy broke down in tears when she realized that her late husband's inheritance money hadn't been lost to a bad investment as Dale had claimed, but had been stolen through a fake business opportunity he'd presented during her grief. Elderly Uncle Frank discovered that his missing Social Security checks hadn't been delayed by government processing errors but had been diverted to accounts controlled by Janet, who had convinced him to sign papers she claimed would expedite his benefits. The most heartbreaking revelation involved Cousin Michelle's divorce settlement money, which she'd loaned to my parents during her custody battle when she was emotionally vulnerable and financially stressed. They'd claimed their own lawyer needed immediate payment to prevent losing their house, and she'd provided $12,000 believing she was helping family members avoid homelessness. The money had actually funded a gambling trip to Atlantic City where they'd lost everything within 48 hours. Detective Hayes chose that moment to present arrest warrants for all 3 perpetrators, having coordinated with local law enforcement to ensure they couldn't escape once their crimes became public knowledge. Dale and Janet attempted to flee through the back door when they saw police cars arriving, but they were apprehended in Raymond's backyard with suitcases full of cash they'd withdrawn from various accounts that morning. Their preparation for immediate departure proved they'd been planning to disappear once their family fraud network was exposed. Trevor's reaction was the most dramatic and ultimately the most revealing. When confronted with evidence of his role in gathering intelligence and creating false documents, he suffered a complete psychological breakdown and confessed everything in front of 30 witnesses and 2 recording devices. His detailed confession revealed the full scope of their criminal enterprise, including victims we hadn't identified yet and methods we hadn't discovered. He described years of planning and coordination, with each family member assigned specific roles in their theft operations. The confession revealed that targeting me wasn't random or opportunistic but had been planned since my sophomore year of college, when they realized I was likely to graduate with a good job and no debt thanks to my scholarships. They'd been monitoring my progress and financial situation for 2 years, waiting for the perfect moment to approach me for money when I'd be emotionally vulnerable and financially stable enough to provide substantial funds. Kevin Murphy's news cameras captured the entire confrontation, including the arrests and Trevor's confession, creating a public record that would prevent my parents from spinning alternative narratives about their crimes. The story would air that evening on local news, warning other families about their methods while providing accountability that the legal system alone couldn't deliver. The public exposure would make it impossible for them to target new victims even if they avoided significant jail time. Judge Helen Parker reviewed the evidence during their arraignment and was shocked by the sophistication and cruelty of their fraud operations. The systematic targeting of elderly relatives with dementia, the exploitation of grief and divorce, and the elaborate documentation they'd created demonstrated planning and intent that warranted serious criminal penalties. She set bond amounts that exceeded their ability to pay, ensuring they would remain in custody until their trials. The plea negotiations revealed additional crimes they'd committed against people outside our family, including neighbors, co-workers, and acquaintances who had been deceived with similar sob stories about emergencies requiring immediate financial assistance. Their criminal enterprise extended far beyond family relationships and had been generating substantial income for years through systematic manipulation of anyone who showed compassion for their fabricated crises. Uncle Raymond was appointed as grandmother Mildred's legal guardian to prevent future financial abuse and ensure her remaining years would be free from exploitation. The money they'd stolen from her Social Security was recovered through asset seizures, though the emotional damage from their betrayal would take much longer to heal. Her confusion and fear gradually diminished once she understood that the threats to her security had been lies designed to manipulate her granddaughter. The sentencing phase brought additional revelations about their criminal history, including fraud charges in neighboring states that had been dismissed due to lack of evidence. Detective Hayes had coordinated with other jurisdictions to build a comprehensive case that would prevent them from simply relocating and targeting new victims. The pattern of their crimes showed clear escalation and sophistication that warranted significant prison time. Dale received 5 years in federal prison for elder abuse, identity theft, and organized fraud, while Janet was sentenced to 4 years for her role in the conspiracy and emotional manipulation of victims. Trevor's cooperation with authorities earned him a reduced sentence of 2 years plus mandatory gambling addiction treatment, though his detailed confession ensured that appeals would be unsuccessful. The restitution orders required full repayment to all victims plus damages for emotional distress and legal costs. The family reunion that had started with my presentation of evidence ended with the arrest of 3 criminals who happened to be my relatives. The other family members who had been deceived and stolen from felt a mixture of relief, anger, and sadness as they realized that their trust had been systematically exploited by people they'd loved and supported. The emotional healing process would take years, but the legal accountability provided a foundation for rebuilding relationships based on honesty and respect rather than manipulation and fear. 6 months after that devastating family reunion, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined when I stood alone in that graduation ceremony parking lot. The financial services firm where I worked had not only retained me despite my parents' harassment campaign but had promoted me to senior analyst after learning about my role in exposing their sophisticated fraud operation. My experience with family financial crimes had given me unique insights that proved invaluable in detecting similar patterns in client accounts, turning my personal trauma into professional expertise that helped protect other potential victims. The promotion came with a substantial salary increase that allowed me to establish the foundation I'd been dreaming about since my college graduation. The Mildred Thompson Scholarship Fund provided financial assistance to students from abusive families, helping them achieve educational goals without depending on relatives who might exploit their success. The first scholarship recipient was a young woman whose parents had stolen her college savings to fund their drug addiction, a situation that reminded me how fortunate I'd been to escape my family's manipulation with my education and career prospects intact. My speaking engagements about family financial abuse had grown from local community centers to regional conferences where financial professionals, law enforcement officers, and social workers gathered to learn about detection and prevention strategies. Sharing my story publicly had been terrifying at first, but the response from other survivors who recognized their own experiences in my narrative convinced me that education and awareness could prevent future victimization. Each presentation reached dozens of people who might encounter similar situations in their personal or professional lives. The relationship with my grandmother Mildred had blossomed into something deeper and more meaningful than I'd ever experienced with my parents. Her assisted living facility had become my regular weekend destination, where we'd spend hours talking about her childhood, her marriage to my grandfather, and her dreams for my future. Her dementia symptoms had improved significantly once the stress and fear from my parents' manipulation was removed, proving that their emotional abuse had been exacerbating her medical condition. Uncle Raymond had stepped naturally into the supportive father role that Dale had never filled, offering guidance and encouragement without trying to control or manipulate my decisions. Our weekly phone calls covered everything from career decisions to relationship advice, and his presence at important events felt genuine rather than obligatory. He'd helped me understand that healthy family relationships were based on mutual respect and support rather than debt, guilt, and emotional blackmail. Dr. Carol Anderson, the therapist I'd started seeing after the trials concluded, had helped me process 24 years of emotional neglect and manipulation while developing healthy boundaries and relationship skills. Our sessions focused on recognizing manipulation tactics, building self-worth independent of others' approval, and learning to trust my judgment when people tried to exploit my compassion or sense of duty. The therapy had been expensive but necessary for breaking the patterns of thinking that had made me vulnerable to my parents' exploitation. Jennifer and I had developed a close friendship that felt like the sister relationship I'd always wanted but never had with my biological family. Our support group for family fraud survivors met monthly at the community center, providing a safe space for people to share their experiences and learn from each other's recovery strategies. The group had grown to include 15 regular members whose stories ranged from inheritance theft to elaborate con games, proving that family financial abuse was more common than most people realized. The romantic relationship that had developed with Jake Williams, Jennifer's younger brother, surprised me with its health and stability after years of dysfunction in my family relationships. Jake appreciated my strength and independence rather than trying to diminish them, and his own experience with family drama had given him understanding about the recovery process I was navigating. Our relationship progressed naturally without pressure or manipulation, allowing me to experience what genuine love and support felt like for the first time. My new apartment across town represented a fresh start in every possible way, from the modern furnishings I'd chosen myself to the security system that kept unwanted family members away. The walls were covered with photographs of chosen family, graduation celebrations with the Chens, scholarship fund events, support group gatherings, and holidays with Uncle Raymond and Grandmother Mildred. These images represented relationships built on mutual care and respect rather than obligation and exploitation. The college friends who had become my true family celebrated my achievements with enthusiasm and pride that my biological parents had never shown. Ashley Chen's family still included me in their holiday celebrations, treating me as a daughter they'd gained rather than a charity case they'd rescued. These relationships taught me that family connections could be created through love and choice rather than inherited through genetics and maintained through guilt. My annual college scholarship fund celebration had become a highlight of my year, bringing together dozens of people who understood the importance of education and independence for young people escaping abusive families. The event raised enough money to provide full tuition assistance for 3 students each year, creating opportunities for academic success that wouldn't be threatened by family manipulation or theft. Watching scholarship recipients graduate debt-free and pursue their dreams validated every difficult decision I'd made in establishing my independence. The letters my parents sent from prison remained unopened in a box in my closet, a reminder of their ongoing attempts to manipulate my emotions even from behind bars. Dr. Anderson had helped me understand that reading their manipulative apologies and requests for money would only restart cycles of guilt and confusion that I'd worked hard to escape. My healing process required maintaining boundaries that protected my emotional and financial well-being regardless of their claims about reformed behavior or genuine remorse. My testimony in subsequent family fraud cases had helped convict 8 other defendants whose methods were similar to my parents' approach, proving that their criminal strategies were being used by manipulators across the country. Law enforcement agencies now consulted with me about family financial crime investigations, and my experience had contributed to training programs that helped officers recognize the signs of systematic family abuse before victims lost everything to relatives they trusted. The final lesson I'd learned through this devastating but ultimately liberating experience was that family is something you choose rather than something you're born into. Love requires respect, honesty, and genuine care for another person's well-being rather than viewing them as resources to be exploited when convenient. The people who truly love you celebrate your successes without expecting payment, support your dreams without demanding control, and treat your achievements as sources of pride rather than opportunities for manipulation. Standing at my office window on a sunny Tuesday morning, looking at my framed graduation photo surrounded by pictures of people who genuinely cared about my happiness, I realized that my parents' betrayal had ultimately led me to the family I'd always deserved. Their greed and manipulation had freed me from toxic relationships and opened space in my life for connections based on mutual respect and authentic love. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing you exactly who they really are, even when that truth is painful to accept. Have you ever experienced family members who treated your success as their opportunity rather than your achievement? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below about how you've dealt with relatives who prioritized money over relationships. If this story resonated with your own experiences, please hit that like button and share it with anyone who might need to hear that they're not alone in dealing with family manipulation. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family trauma and building the life you deserve. Remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is protect yourself from people who claim to love you but consistently show you otherwise. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you recognize your own worth and the importance of choosing relationships that celebrate your success rather than exploit it.